But tonight, we get to welcome Kristin Kimball here, and we also have Mark, which was a surprise for me, but they, and their daughter, Miranda, flew down from their farm in New York. She's here to talk about her second memoir called Good Husbandry, which is
I'm
Karen.
a good husband.
Yeah, there you go. Which, as Karen mentioned, is a really good title for this wonderful book. I don't have bio background for you, because I didn't expect to. Kristin grew up in central New York and moved to New York City after graduating from Harvard. There she worked at a literary agency. She taught creative writing and freelance for magazines and travel guides. In 2002, she interviewed, in her words, a wingnut farmer named Mark, and took more than a professional interest in both him and his vocation. But that's her description. Together they founded Essex Farm in 2004, and that was what she portrayed in her first book, The Dirty Life, a memoir of farming, food, and love, which was published in 2010. Essex Farm is currently over 1,000 acres of sustainable, diversified farm in the Champlain Valley of Vermont, New York, right across Lake Champlain from Vermont. They offer full diet, year-round CSA membership, and they supply people on the farm and all the way down to New York City and places in between. So it's a pretty massive business from what I can understand from reading the books. Kristin and Mark have 2 daughters, and along with parenting and farming, Kristin has written about food, life, and farming for various publications. And without further ado, please help me welcome our guest tonight.
There's lots of seats.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody.
Do you have your body mic?
That's for the camera.
Got it.
All right. I'll just pull it out too. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to begin by saying thank you so much to Norwich Bookstore for having us here. I feel like there are few career paths that are more shaky than farming, and owning an indie bookstore in the age of Amazon might be one of them. And I would bet that the booksellers feel the same about what they sell as the way we feel about what we sell, which is that what we sell is magic. And it's really important for the health and the happiness of your community to have this store here. I know from my little knowledge of the book business that if it weren't for indie booksellers, the books that would come across your consciousness would be created by algorithm and not by a human being. And what you have in your community is somebody who can look in your eyes and prescribe a book for you, and that's not nothing. So thank you for being here. And you can all give yourselves a hand, because thank you for walking into a bookstore instead of clicking buy on your computer. So I was thinking on my way here that the last time that I kicked off book tour, I had given birth, I believe, 3 weeks before, and I had a little tiny baby with me on these first readings that I did. And I was very nervous, I was very postpartum, I was very hormonal, and I didn't know how to do this. And I have to say that it is much easier, having done it once, and it's much easier when that little baby is now 9 years old. Can you stand up? And she can come here on her own feet, and she's not going to interrupt us to ask to nurse. One of the things I've learned about readings, too, since the last book is that less is more. And I really, especially because we have Mark here, and we've got Miranda here, and we've got my neighbor Beth here, who has appeared in both books, I think. I know you were in the first one, I can't remember. Beth's the one who flew us here in her airplane. So I would really love it if we could make tonight interactive. And I'll do a little bit of reading just to spark conversation, but we would love to hear your questions and make this a conversation, if that's okay with everyone. Does that sound all right? Okay, good. So if you haven't started this one yet, and you have read the other one, you know that I left my apartment in New York City. Mark left his farm in Pennsylvania. We fell madly in love. This is the first book, giving you the cliff notes. And we started a farm together in the Adirondack Park in northern New York State, just across Lake Champlain from Charlotte, Vermont. And the first book traces what it was like to really be a fish out of water and learn the skills that it took to grow a full diet year-round in our northern climate. This book kind of picks up where that one left off, and it's sort of the story of what happens after romance kind of cools, both with a marriage and with farming for me, and how to find your way through that very dangerous territory of a deepening relationship that's no longer novel, that's no longer something really new, but it's something deeper and sometimes more difficult. So I thought I would just read a few paragraphs of the opening. I'm going to skip around a little bit so you get some payoff. And then we could ask a round of questions, and then we can do a little more reading, a little more talking, and then we'll wrap up and sign books. Okay? Here's what you need to know. That we run a farm together that grows a full diet year-round for members. So we have dairy cows, we have beef cows, we have pigs, we've got chickens, we've got 50 different kinds of vegetables, we grow grains, we grow fruits, we have everything that you need to have a full, interesting and nutritious diet year-round. You need to know that Mark is my husband. And at this point in the book where we pick up, we've been at it for 7 years together. And then the only other thing you need to know is that we have a daughter who's named Jane, who's 3 when this takes place. And we have another daughter who's on the way, but not here yet. Some people say farming is the most wholesome job in the universe. I say having a farm is more like having a gambling problem. A farm is a living, breathing slot machine, doling out just enough reward at exactly the right moment to keep you coming back for more. Farmers are professional hopers, wafting supplication toward ancient gods we don't believe in. We hope in order to ward off disease and accident, or for rain, but not too much, or no rain, but not for too long. If frost threatens early in the fall or late in the spring, we double down on hope, trying to generate with it the degree or two of heat that is the difference between death and another few weeks of life, between a good harvest and none at all. When we win these bets, it's magic, like making something out of nothing. When we lose, the chips that get swept off the table can be measured in both love and money. I figured this out one planting season. The fields were so dry, the wind picked up topsoil and spun it into devils that danced around us as we dug our hands beneath the surface, feeling for moisture. My husband, Mark, and I had built a new greenhouse at the end of winter, and there were tens of thousands of plants inside it. Winter squash, cucumbers, Brussels sprouts, and tomatoes, straining against the limits of their blocks of soil. It was time for transplanting, but the ground was too dry. The young roots that had developed under the ideal conditions of the greenhouse, with just enough moisture, just enough heat, would confront the real world of the field, which had dried to inhospitable dust. The tender roots would be sucked dry, and the young, healthy plants would wilt and die. We had to wait for rain to come and water the soil. So we wait, and we wait, and we wait, and we wait, and no rain comes. And it becomes late enough in the season that if we don't plant, we know we're doomed. And one day we look at the weather report and we realize that there's a 20% chance of rain. So we spend the whole day and put all of our effort toward getting these little tiny plants into the field. By the end of the day, we were tired, we were hopeful, but not very hopeful. We put Jane to bed and then went to bed ourselves. We were 4 weeks from the summer solstice, and it was still light outside. There were no clouds to be seen. If it didn't rain, all those plants and the hundreds of hours of work they represented would die, and we'd have to figure out some way to replace them in order to feed our members. I read for a while to try to forestall the worry. Mark, next to me, was making notes for the next day. He is missing the gene for anxiety. Unlike me, he does not spend energy considering the full rainbow of disaster that could take place, nor does he stew over past decisions or regret stupid things he once said at a party, both sports at which I am a champion. He does not miss people who are no longer in his life. He does not think much about the past at all, but he does think about the future. Hope is a future thing. Worries, the ebullient cousin. He does hope. I have never met a farmer who doesn't. I think I'll pause there. So that's what we do. That's what these two books are about. This book has a kind of a harder center than the other book. The narrative arc of this book is about 1 year where Mark got injured. It started raining in the spring and it didn't stop. We had an infant and a toddler and some very, very tricky finances happening on the farm. And all of those things at once were very overwhelming. So that is that's sort of the narrative heart of the book. But I thought, why don't we take a few questions? We could talk about how the farm works. We could talk about how memoir works. We could talk about what it's like to be the subject of one. Anything really that you want to talk about, we're happy to discuss. Yes?
When did you start writing that narrative? Were you writing it in the middle of the hard year, or did you decide later that this was the year that you needed to document?
So the question was, when did I start writing it? Was I aware during the year that this was going to be the heart of the book? The answer to that is absolutely not. I was taking notes just because that's what I do, but I think it's really hard to see how an event fits into the narrative that is your life until you're quite a ways past it. And for me, that seems to be like 5 years. And that's what I tell my editor when I don't have my manuscript on anyway. So I think there probably was a tiny part of me that knew that one of the good things that could come from the suffering was story. But that might be a little more mercenary than I actually felt at the time. But conflict is what creates story. So one of the good things about being a writer is that no matter what life is throwing at you, the bad stuff can be crafted into something hopefully useful in the future. That said, I think this is my last memoir for a while, so I'm no longer taking notes on what can go wrong. Anyone else? Yes?
Kristin, I'd love to hear about your actual writing practice. Do you write early in the morning? Do you squeeze it in the middle of the day? How do you fit that in with the obvious constraints of your life?
My writing process is, I would say, fairly haphazard. I do my best, really routine work early in the morning, especially when the kids were smaller. It was much easier to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning when nobody else was awake, nobody was making noise, even the farm wasn't really awake yet, and work a few hours in the morning to get some traction, and then try to get some more hours in later on in the day. As the kids got older, that got a little bit easier. They would go to school during the day, so best of all is when I get some work done first thing in the morning when my brain is bright and my imagination is engaged, and then come back later and sit down and spend some concentrated hours getting the real work done, the rewriting, editing, rewriting again, editing again, that sort of thing. When I was trying to finish this manuscript, I actually left the farm for, like a long weekend? And I checked into a seedy hotel in Plattsburgh. I felt like I was doing, I was there on some sort of a bender, but it was all about words and not about, taking drugs or anything like that. And I just locked myself in a gross hotel room and spent 4 days just ripping everything apart, putting it back together so that I could send it on to my editor, who then, just made sense of it all and helped me tremendously. Yes?
I told you last time when we were here, and you may remember that I had been wanting to go to Cuba for a long time. There's a lot of farming. I had been wanting to go to Cuba just because I was interested in the culture and what was, Castro. And there were tours to go, but I put together, I had been there with a tour myself, and I said I want to come back, and so I put that together for the whole family, and so there were questions like the burning of the sugar cane and the loss of sugar, and income, and that was a political government thing. Do you see in today's world the government hurting or helping in any way? And I mean the president.
So I was lucky enough to go to Cuba with a tour of farmers about 3 years ago, and got to see the amazing thing that happened in Cuba when, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the island had to figure out how to feed itself. And they just remarkably, against all odds, did it. They say that everybody on the island lost 20 pounds, but nobody starved to death. And it's a really remarkable example of what can happen when policy and need and will come together. And I say that because, it's not a democracy, so, it's easier to make enormous changes in policy, but there's a downside to that also, obviously. But it was a really, really remarkable thing to see that a place like that can actually feed itself. And it gave me a lot of hope, because I think sometimes it feels like if that sort of thing's not possible, but it is. As far as farm policy goes here in the United States, I don't want to get too far out of my depth because I'm not an expert on policy. I'm really interested in policy because I deeply think that the best thing that you can do to change our food system is vote. Pay attention to the people you think are making good decisions, vote them into office, and then tell them what it is that you want your food landscape to look like. But I'm a little hesitant to get any deeper than that because I'm not a policy expert, and I find myself sometimes saying things that just get me into the weeds. But do you have anything to add on that, Mark?
Not yet.
Okay. Next book, when I come here, I will be prepared and we can talk about policy. Yes.
So when you were telling the story about waiting for the rain, you didn't have any irrigation system at the time?
We didn't and do not. No. For us, lack of water, it has been a much smaller problem than too much water. So the main problem of this book was that we needed drainage, that we were continually late or were not able to plant because we had fields that were too wet and we couldn't get in them. But we still don't have irrigation. But that's kind of on the list, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I think it opens up a bigger question of how much control do we want in our food system. Right now, flying over here, thanks to Beth, we got to look down at most of the Addison County dairy farms, and I was just imagining how few people were farming that much acreage. And if you read McPhee's Control of Nature, our agricultural system is quickly heading towards a really optimized, controlled system that's highly mechanized. And I think part of the invention of our farm is to try to decouple from that, to try to use less energy, to use less irrigation, and see what we can do to maximize the sort of ecosystem strengths of the farm and adjust accordingly. And I think for us, the other huge factor that is involved in how much drainage or irrigation we have is in trying to grow a diversified diet, we're sort of going against the economy of scale. If we just grew parsley and made dried parsley flakes, we might be very profitable. But we've chosen a really diversified system. So every time we look at buying an irrigation system or figuring it out, we're like, well, not yet. Well, we don't have a backup generator, so when the generator goes out, we don't milk our cows with machines. We go back to milking them by hand. And Kristin says, aren't we supposed to have a backup gen set? Right? So I think irrigation is in our future, but I like being at the sort of forward operating base of what could be called in 100 years, with good farmers, sustainable. I don't think any farm that I've seen is close to sustainable, but I think we're really fighting very hard to get there.
Yes.
Just curious how many families belong to your CSA now, and maybe chat a little bit about how you got to that scale.
Yep. Do you know how many, I don't know the number of families.
110 families, 300 people.
Did you hear that? About 110 families, 300 people. Split between our local community in Essex and the capital region, Albany, New York, and New York City. And a bit more than half of our revenue comes from the New York City memberships now. We started with 7 members our first year. By the end of our first year, I think we were 30 members. So, and then we grew steadily in the 16 years in between. Most of the local growth was, actually most of the growth period was word of mouth. We have never put a ton of energy or resources into marketing, nothing into advertising. It's members selling the share to other members. Probably 85–90% of our business is memberships. We do have a little retail store. We do a little bit of wholesale, but the heart of our business is year-round memberships. Yes.
I was fascinated. First of all, I love your book. I loved it. I didn't want it to end, and I'm bummed you're not going to do another memoir.
I am.
Wait.
I'm going to do one, but
She's
I have to
totally
let
gonna
the
do one.
mud settle.
I'm working on a plot myself. That's what I
But I was fascinated with the whole New York scene. I mean, that just seemed like such a leap.
Yeah.
And so it's a twofold question. How did you do that? And I'm assuming that your particular CSA is the kind where you take the same thing to everybody. We have, oh, it's not. Okay, could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Our CSA is full diet, free choice, unlimited. So when you come to the farm or you make your order online, you can order or take any quantity, any combination of what we have available that week. So if you want 10 pounds of ground beef and no vegetables, you could do that. If you want 30 pounds of carrots and nothing else, you could do that. Most people are somewhere in between.
So it's a set amount for that? It's a set monetary amount?
The membership is a set amount that you pay at the beginning of the year, and then you're a member for the entire year. We also do seasonal memberships that have a bit of a markup on them for people who are just in our area for the summer, but most of our members are year-round. Does that make sense? You want me to talk more about that?
Well, about New York.
Okay, so New York. So New York happened because, mostly because we had these wonderful young farmers who would come to work for us or who were arriving in the area otherwise and discovered, this beautiful farmland and dug in and made farms that were very similar to ours. My reaction to that was, and Mark's reaction was, woo! He was very, very happy that there were more farms coming into the area. It made me nervous. He was right. He used to say, imagine how amazing it'll be when we have a farm economy, a local farm economy that's vibrant enough to support, a agricultural supply store again, or all the other adjacent businesses that have gone away in the last 30 years. But we also live in a very small market. Essex itself is 700 people. The population of the surrounding communities are not much bigger, and there was not enough market to support all of these new farms. And that's when we decided to stretch to New York City. Again, we started there very small. My sister was there, a couple other key people who we knew would be anchors and good shareholders. And we just started sending a van full of food down every week. And most weeks we would add a member or two until we got to where we are. And that was, 6 years ago that we started doing that? about 6 years that we've been doing New York City. And we deliver apartment to apartment, so we get the order. They order whatever they want from what we have available. We have an amazing crew that packs it. It goes into a refrigerated truck that's run by somebody who started one of those adjacent businesses to the farm. She does the transportation and she has the commercial kitchen. And they take it down to the city, split it into 2 vans. One goes down the west side, one goes down the east side, and then they go into Brooklyn and they drop the food at your apartment and you pop it in your refrigerator and you eat like a farmer all week.
You charge more for New York?
A lot more.
Okay.
Yeah. What is it per person?
It's $145 per person per week.
$145 per person per week in New York City and $85 per person per week locally.
So you're not doing any commercial, you're not doing any value added with the commercial kitchen on property?
The commercial kitchen is not on property, but it's adjacent to our farm and it's run by a different company. It's called the Hub on the Hill.
Okay, so for you, you didn't see any upside to doing any, extending the shelf life of your product by putting any kind of, I'm going to keep using the word commercial kitchen, on your property?
We were lucky enough to have somebody who started a commercial kitchen just literally hundreds of yards away from us.
Mhm.
So we didn't have to add that infrastructure to our farm because she's doing that for maybe 10 farms in our region. There's a lot of upside in added value. You know, the value of a jar of sauerkraut is exponentially higher than that of a cabbage. So there's a lot of upside to it, but there's also a lot of infrastructure, and we were really glad that in that case, we didn't have to invent the wheel for ourselves on our farm.
So then what percentage of what she's processing is servicing the area versus it going down to New York?
Cheese processing in particular?
No.
What the cheese
How much she is
processing? Oh, what she is processing. I mean, we're not the only farm that she works with. There's probably 10 farms. And a lot of it is sold locally, or a lot of it is distributed in other places in our region. There are some other farms that hitch rides with our stuff as it goes south. But I don't know what the percentage of their produce is that's leaving the area.
I ask that because there is no commercial kitchen in the Upper Valley.
Oh,
And
there's
there
an
are-
opportunity.
Well,
But there are kitchens.
there are kitchens on the farms.
Yes, and that's what we used before the commercial kitchen, and I think in this book you have a scene of, didn't you write about cabbage processing?
I did.
So,
And we actually have a farm in the area that does just that. They process their cabbage on the farm, but that's all they can do. And it limits.
Yeah.
And so there's been a lot of looking at why can't we pull off a commercial kitchen in the Upper Valley? And to date, we have been unable to make that work.
I would invite you to come see the Hub on the Hill.
Mm-hmm.
It's run by this superpower woman, Jory Weekend,
Mm-hmm.
and she's just, I mean, she does so much on behalf of all the farms in our region.
Mm.
It's a tough business.
Yep.
I think, what is it? You have to put through about $1 million of product in order, oh, 3 million? Sorry, not so good with the numbers.
that's fine.
In order to make your typical food hub profitable.
Mhm.
So you do need a kind of density of market and a density of farms in order to make it work. And you need somebody like Jory who is resourceful and scrappy and just dedicated to the idea that you can make it work. But she's very open to sharing what they're doing there and loves to talk about it. And well, talk might be the wrong. She's very quiet, but she loves to share what she does and would be open to having, you know, a group of people, interested people, come to see it.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, Miranda.
What is the best thing about farming?
Oh. Well, maybe I should turn that question back to you. What do you think the best thing about farming is? You talk right into it.
I think the best part of farming is getting to know people, helping crops, and giving food to other people.
I think I feel about the same as you do about that. I still think for me that the food is the golden handcuff of the farm, right? If we stopped farming and we didn't have access to the quality of food that we have now, I would have to get very rich in order to afford it and buy it from different places in the world. So I think it would be hardest for me to give up food. I think for a lot of the people who work on the farm, the best thing is that they get to be outside and they get to work physically. I think that's something that everyone who comes to work for us and stays and enjoys it has in common. What do you think the best thing about farming is?
I've loved farming for a long time. That's a good question. I think you both hit on definitely some of the answers, and so I'll second those. And I'll say that I think the other thing for me that's really exciting about farming right now, and it's starting to show up in the news cycle, is that farming is one of the businesses where, even though it's hard to measure, you can see some of the externalities of your business. An externality is something that's not measured on your bottom line usually. So an externality of making GE products in near Lake Champlain was PCBs are in the lake. That's a negative externality. A positive externality is if we all take a deep breath and smile right now. That didn't necessarily show up on the bookstore's balance sheet. But getting to the point, they're starting to look at farms and say, well, what are you doing wrong? Which is there's huge releases of carbon dioxide from plowing and animals. But there also is this incredible, very simple technology of growing plants, which takes the carbon or energy out of the air and back into the soil and then for us. So I think right now on sort of the edge of what I'm excited about is trying to figure out which practices allow us to reverse climate change in our agricultural activities. And with that, I'm also relentlessly looking at all of you to see who's going to be the next farmer, because that really won't happen well unless a lot more percentage of the population goes back to the land, as we were talking about people liking being outside with an agricultural career. But right now that percentage is plummeting. Wisconsin lost 40 dairies in 10 years. And New York, 40%, excuse me, of their dairies in 10 years. So just imagine that's similar in Vermont and New York as well. So the migration away from farms, I think, leads us to some more problems. So you kind of, after this, need to apply to work with us.
So can you talk a little about who works for you and what, because you're here now and the farm, you got dairies, so somebody's working there.
Yeah. Our crew ranges between 15 and 30 people over the course of the year. We have a mix of a few people who I think are with us for the long haul, career people. A bunch of people who come to work for 2 or 3 or 4 years because they want to learn skills and start their own farms. And that's been the biggest chunk of our workforce for the last decade or so. And now we have a new Amish community in town. And so we have a partly Amish workforce, which definitely is going to be part of the third memoir. That part is definitely going to be part of the third memoir. It's very interesting to see two cultures work side by side with very different values, very different practices, but the same goal. So we have 2 Amish families who live on the farm, and then we have the younger daughters of some of the neighboring Amish families who drive their buggies to the farm to, help with carrot harvest or help whatever we need. So that's basically what our workforce looks like. Anything to add on that? It's a perpetual problem to try to make sure that we have enough labor when we need it. And minimum wage law is changing, so it's going to be increasingly expensive as a percentage of our overall budget. Yes.
I'm remembering reading your first book, towards the end I think it was, you talked about how when you were really struggling just to get this thing going, that people just showed up to help.
Yeah.
Was that kind of a novel thing in the beginning, or does that sometimes still happen? Because I remember thinking, if I wasn't so old, I would go and do that. I read this with my book club, and we're all, most of them are even quite a bit older than me. And
we have jobs for people. We have jobs for people no matter their age. So next time, come over. We still do have days where we put out the call. We get on Facebook or on Instagram and say, come on over and help. Shearing day for the sheep is a day when we need a lot of labor. So we do get quite a few volunteers. When's the most recent? Our potato harvest, we got some volunteers.
And carrots.
And carrot harvest, we got volunteers. A lot of times that will be college students who can come for the day. We get a lot of tours of young people and college students who, come for a day and they're intrigued, but not quite ready to quit school and take a job with us. So they'll keep their ears open and come over when we have a day like that. But it still happens. Yes.
NPR had a piece on, in the past few days, talking about Vermont farmers and issues, and that part of their labor force is,
Migrant.
Migrant, irrespective of status.
Yep.
Migrant, but actually the ones that were legitimate, there was a 90-day window that they can only work for 90 days.
Yeah.
Have you run into that? And
I
what's
think that's
effect
the
of that?
H-2A visa, is that right?
There's all sorts of situations.
Yeah, we have explored using migrant labor occasionally, and we haven't done it for a variety of reasons. I feel
We had Team Guatemala 4 years ago.
that's true. We had a team from Guatemala who came and did the big root harvest for us for just a couple weeks, about 4 years ago. We both speak Spanish and we both love to speak Spanish, so we would be eager to find a situation where that might work, but we haven't yet found the right situation. There's a lot of complicating factors, and if you're going through a broker and getting people who have H-2A visas, it's quite expensive. It's not cheap. So you need a certain economy of scale on your farm to make that sort of labor work. And I'm personally a little bit uncomfortable with the vulnerability that a lot of that population is living and working under. And the places where I've sort of seen the system and how it works made me uncomfortable. The particular view that I had of it. But certainly we are short on labor, and there is a shortage of people who want to do really hard farm work for minimum wage. So there's definitely a place for migrant labor, for sure.
Maryland, in the eastern shore of Maryland, there are a lot of nurseries, and they're just whole communities living in trailers of Hispanic laborers who really are there for the long haul.
Yeah.
And I run into that through being part of educating their kids.
It's interesting. I've been thinking a lot lately that somewhere between 1% and 2% of the American population is involved in agriculture right now. So, and a huge chunk of that is migrant or visiting labor, which tends to be kind of invisible, and it's a whole other part of our food system that we just simply don't see. You here in Vermont, you're pretty connected to your landscape and to the people who are growing food, but a lot of the people that I talk to are completely removed from the people and the places that are growing their food, and that's one of the factors. Just that the people who are doing the work are invisible. Yeah. Did you want to say something about that? Okay. Yes.
You started out by saying that part of your narrative arc relies on the conflict and the intimacy of your relationship with your family, and I'm wondering how that plays out in the editorial process.
That's a really good question.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. She was noting that I was talking about how some of the narrative arc of this book is about the conflict in our relationship, and the conflict between my needs, the kids' needs, the farm's needs. And she said, how did that work in the editing process when you're basically, she didn't say it like this, but you're living with the person who's the protagonist / antagonist of your narrative arc. So, I mean, I'll let Mark talk about that a little bit, but I just wanted to say first that he's so generous to let me tell our story from my point of view. And he's never gotten crabby or controlling about how I represent him.
But I have gotten crabby and controlling.
Yes, also. But I know it's really hard to be written about, and he's so generous to let me do it, and basically use him in the way that I want to in order to make a story out of it. But I don't know, how does it feel, Mark?
I'm working on a deep state tell-all that nobody knows about. She doesn't even know I've been writing it. It's gonna open up the whole can of Essex Farm. I think what is important for me to remember, and there are times where I'm either embarrassed or sort of like, oh, do we really want that to go out there? That doesn't actually usually ever cross my mind. It's her writing, but I think it doesn't take a lot of words of Kristin's to read to realize that the genius that she brings to the table is the putting together of words. And I think pretty much anything I've ever seen you write about makes me excited to read it. It's sort of like picking up the New Yorker. You can be reading about basketball if you're not a basketball player, and you're sort of brought into it. And so I think I've felt since day one, while there is sometimes hilarious, like, what did you marry me for? Was it the story that I'm creating, or was it for other attributes that I may or may not have? That I think I have felt really open about her sharing her story, and I think for all of us to become writers to the best of our ability is a nice way to see yourself. And I do believe someone was asking what are the criteria of the farmers we hire, a different subject but related to what we were just talking about. And Kristin's ability, in her words, to sort of see around us in a less sort of emotional, direct way, and then write about it, is what I think we're looking for as we hire our farmers, which is people that can laugh and cry about their strengths and weaknesses from a slight distance, right? If you were a bird of prey or a carrion eater flying over us, you would have a different perspective on this group right here. And I think that's really healthy to be able to see yourself from different angles. But when I read the books and the writing that Kristin does, I think it's really about the words sing in a certain way. If she was writing about you the whole time, I think I would be wow, cool. Like it's the teller of the tale, and I think being married to the writer has helped me when I see a movie also think that the movie is so much the director, and we forget that.
I think, thank you for that. I think two things came to mind when he was talking. One is that to write memoir, you have to choose aspects of your life that you are the real raw material of what happened to you, but it's very selective. And who we are in the pages of that book are not the entirety of who we are as a couple or as a family. It's one aspect of our story. And I think Mark gets that on a deep level and accepts it. I think it's tough sometimes for people to meet us and we don't exactly match what they read, and they find it kind of uncomfortable, and I find it kind of uncomfortable too. But that's what memoir is. It's writing about an aspect of your lives together and making it into a story. What I found trickier, especially going forward now, is writing about the kids, because I don't want to betray them. They're not old enough to really understand, so they can't really consent to it in the same way that Mark or the farmers could. So I had to be kind of careful about that. And that's kind of why I framed it around those 5 years, because they were really little. And they're at an age now where I just have to be a little bit more thoughtful and delicate about it, because I don't want them to feel like they were being used.
Oh, we never did feel that.
Okay, good. Yes.
On this very thing, a book is now in its 4th edition and selling many, many copies about a life of someone whose life is not as happy as people thought. It's called Hello, Dolly.
Hello, darling.
Hello, Dolly.
Oh, hello, Dolly.
Hello, Dolly.
Uh-huh.
She had a terrible, terrible, terrible life. It began with the parents.
Uh-huh.
And as I say, it's in its 4th edition now. Sold thousands of copies.
Really?
Yeah.
Go dark. It's a lesson. Yes.
So part of what brought me here was that I don't think I'm very good at sticking through what I call the icky middle.
Uh-huh.
And as you sort of reported at the beginning, this feels like you were in the icky middle,
Yeah.
where disillusionment was great, and like, why did I do this, and what am I doing this for? And I'm curious to know, without too much of a spoiler alert or whatever, but how did you stick it out, and what is different now, and are you on the other side, or as you said, you were trying to deepen, and that's a different exercise than falling in love or the novelty. I'm curious what your tricks would be or how you manage that.
You know what? Why don't I read the last bit that I was going to read, because that kind of is the answer that I want to give you.
Great.
I'll just do that. You don't hear the answer, we can talk about it a little bit more later over drinks. And I think what I want to say is that what we had between us, the thing that got us through the sticky middle, aside from two amazing girls, was this farm that we created that we loved very much and that we both felt equally passionate about, and that we felt was a creation that came from both of us and needed both of us to stand. And I think the best marriage therapy we ever had was walking on the farm, and that's the scene that I'm going to read you at the end here. Mark and I took a farm walk. After frost and before the monotone of winter, the farm was in a state of transitional beauty, at the threshold between life and death. The tomatoes on the ground were bright red and softening into the earth. The raspberries clung to the canes, but their life was gone, their color washed from vibrant acrylic to soft gouache. Only the hardy chickweed remained green over frost-rimmed ground. It had taken hold around the tomato stakes and spread from there. It was tenacious, low-growing, and strongly rooted, a formidable enemy. It would give us trouble in the spring. The farm looked fecund, even in the mode of early decay. The cover crop was particularly beautiful. There was an impressive stand of oats, peas, and tillage radish planted to add carbon, nitrogen, and friability to the soil. The radishes had dug 6 inches into the topsoil, their taproot 3 feet. When dead and rotten, they would leave organic matter and airspace behind them, giving next year's plants the underground oxygen they needed to thrive. The peas, most sensitive to frost, were shriveled brown tendrils 12 inches long. The oats were still green. Mark swept up a big handful and chewed it, so that for the rest of the walk, the corners of his mouth were stained green from the juice. It reminded me of a Mark Strand poem I had tacked above my desk when I was in college. Ink runs from the corners of my mouth. There is no happiness like mine. I have been eating poetry. My Mark is a person whose intensity and sheer capacity for joy make him want to consume the things he loves until their essence drips from his mouth. It's a lucky thing, really, that his vices are food, farms, and work. The last sun threw our shadows in front of us. Even all these years in, I find the difference in our height startling. Until I see us reflected somewhere, I forget that I am small and he is so tall. We seem like different species. Mark looks older than when I met him. His face and neck have been creased and permanently colored by the sun, and his sandy hair has crept backward a little, grown thinner. In the unfair way that some men age, it all looks good on him. He is still lean and strong, and his familiar hand is warm and calloused. His physical presence is a pleasure to me. The moon came up, gigantic and perfectly full. I had heard on the radio that this was the month of the supermoon, when the two unlike bodies, one large, one small, are as close as they ever get, and the apparent size of the moon is at its most glorious. This is my place in the world, I thought. 500 acres of soil between mountains and a lake. I was a foreigner here not that long ago, but I have eaten what came from the soil and the rain that fell on it until my cells were made of it. This was the raw material that knitted 2 children together in my body. And if a person's essence is made not of atoms, but of thoughts or of time, still, by any measure, I am made of it, and I belong here. That's what I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for coming and for listening and for all of your good questions.